Our next guest is Professor Adrian Newton, and Professor Newton comes to us from the James Hutton Institute in Scotland. And the title of his presentation today is Resilient Cropping Systems, Some Ingredients. So he is a cereal pathologist by training, but his current research spans broader aspects of arable crops in the context of integrated crop management. So the crop diversity interest has taken more of an ecological focus, working with Hutton colleagues and others, and has encompassed intercropping, especially cereal legume combinations for both, biomass, whole crop and grain. His IPM interests in general have included soil cultivation, particularly the effects of non-inversion versus inversion tillage, the particular approach of direct drilling or conservation tillage and its farming systems contexts are another current area of interest and exciting developments. So the James Hutton Research Institute Centre for Sustainable Cropping is running a number of long-term research trials looking at soil management from a whole cropping system perspective. He says sharing our knowledge with the similar research trials happening at Forthside in Tasmania will be very useful to our understanding of these complex systems. The beauty of these trials is they show the sum of all that has happened in the system, whether it be a crop rotation, tillage practice, cover crop or soil amendment. And our goal is to help farmers achieve resilient cropping systems that can bounce back from tricky crops like potatoes and continue to be productive for future generations. So could we please welcome Professor Newton to the podium? Thank you.
I'll probably need this because I have a bit of a cold, which I also bring with me to share with you. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to come here, and thank you especially to Robert and Callum for looking after me so well on this trip so far. So it's been really great to see the country and see so many really good things happening in the agriculture. I'd forgotten, did I write all that thing in the summary that you just gave there? Because that seems to summarise what I'm going to now tell you at somewhat more length. So hopefully saying it twice, you'll get some of the points. But I'll be going through quite a number of things in not much detail. So I hope you'll just pick out some things, because I'll probably cover them in a very general way and you won't pick up everything, especially with this light on the screen, because you won't be able to see what I'm actually talking about sometimes. But we'll do our best to see some of the main principles of the things that we've been working on. And a lot of the reason for this visit is to try and collaborate in future. And I think already areas like the cover crops, we've all got a lot to learn in how they can best be optimized from what we know so far. If I can just start by saying a little bit about where I come from, the James Hutton Institute, and also straight away acknowledge there's a whole load of people I should thank for components of this talk, but particularly Kathy Hawes, who manages the Centre for Sustainable Cropping, Blair Mackenzie, who's a fellow Australian of yours, he's a soil scientist, so some of the cultivation work particularly there, Ali Carley on the intercropping work, Alison Lees on some of the IPM, and there's a whole load of people who I haven't mentioned. Who are we? We're about 560 scientists, it says there, 150 PhD students total, over 2 sites in Aberdeen and Dundee, and we've got 3 farms, one of which is Balruddery Farm, where we do a lot of our potato and cereal trials, Millfield Farm, where we do a lot of specialist work on things like diseases, and also all the soft fruit work is done there. We do a lot of soft fruit stuff. And Glensoch, which is an upland estate, so a lot of upland pasture and things like this. And in terms, we've had quite a lot of investment recently in terms of infrastructure, in that we're setting up the International Barley Hub, which will coordinate work in barley and other cereals and things, hopefully across many collaborations. And Advanced Plant Growth centre. About 60 million has been put into these centres, so we're hoping for some really great new work and collaborations going on as a result of this investment by the UK government. That's where we are, mostly on the east coast of Scotland, where most of the arable land is. You'll see Aberdeen and Dundee, the two main centres, and well, it actually shows 3 farms, but the one on the left we've actually got rid of recently, and I included our local farm instead. Quite well equipped in terms of facilities to do the work. And that just lists the sort of science groups. So it basically goes from fundamental cellular, molecular sciences through to socioeconomic sciences, geographic sciences, and all sorts of things. So from fundamental to very applied. I'm really talking mostly about some of the applied stuff today. Right, the Centre for Sustainable Cropping. Yeah, it's coming out rather vague there, but basically, it's about designing an integrated system. I'll have to turn this slightly sideways so I can see the screen as well. It's about designing an integrated system, and what we're looking at there is basically everything that goes into a system, or rather we're looking primarily at yield and quality, nutrient budgets, and soil health. And what way I look at it is we're trying to measure everything that goes into a system, what's in the system, and what comes out the other side. So we measure everything from inputs, agronomic inputs, fuel use, and everything like this, sale of produce at the end. But we're really looking for what happens to the system. Its resilience. Are we improving it, or are we degrading it? Are we investing in our resource? If you want more information on it, there is a website which is down at the bottom here. This is pointed, isn't it? Yeah, there we are. The website there. There is actually a YouTube. If you look up YouTube and Ecological Sciences Hutton, you'll actually see a fair bit about the Ecological Sciences group, which includes some of this work, but some of the other work that we do at the moment. That's the setup. It's 6 fields. Over about 40 hectares, and in each half of each field you have an integrated part and a conventional part. And it's really designed as a platform to test out a lot of things and an open resource for collaboration. The basic rotation we've got, which came up after much argument, is potato, which already provides a major issue in terms of sustainability of soils. Winter wheat, winter barley, oilseed rape, faba beans, and spring barley, and then it goes round. And we're partway through our second cycle at the moment. Within each half of each field, we actually have a common variety, in fact 2 common varieties represented there, and the third plot strip. So within each farming system, if you like, in each field, we can also do more detailed plot experiments to look at individual factors and how they vary. But we're looking at soils, plant nutrients, and biodiversity. And if we go through those just one by one with a few examples. First of all, soils. There we're basically trying to improve the soil conditions, the things I've listed on the left if you can see it. But basically by doing things like conservation tillage, carbon amendments, putting more green waste in and putting straw in, and things like tide ridging in when it comes to potatoes. And this is the sort of thing we've been finding, that yes, it does improve things like, already you're finding things like soil pH, organic matter, carbon, phosphorus, potassium. That's shown in here, you might be able to see, but the integrated bars, the blue ones are higher, showing an increase, an improvement in that, in the right direction, in the integrated part of it as well. And soil strength, the graph on the right, basically hasn't really changed over this time, so that's okay. These are 6 fields. The dots, incidentally, are GPS reference points that we take constant samples and archive them and measure all sorts of things at those locations. But just if you look at there, the 2 parts of the field is representing something changed between the 2 halves in terms of management. And again, you probably can't see this for the light, unfortunately. But here is the soil, which is just looking like brown soil. But here you've got water running off a great deal. So already the percolation rate has been substantially changed by the management. We've improved things considerably there. terms of soil health, we're trying to put more carbon in and improve the microbiology, so the degradation or the decomposition of things like litter, and hopefully get more earthworms. And this, again, basically shows the higher bars, the red ones, are basically showing more litter decomposition. How do we measure that? We actually bury things like tea bags of a particular standard type and then look at the degradation after a certain times. Or this other one, which creates quite a good bit of amusement, is burying cotton underpants. Apparently, they have to come from a certain supplier, so it's sort of a soil my undies challenge. So you dig up these after you've buried them for 6 months, a year, and if they're degraded like those there, then you've got good microbiology in your soil. It's a nice visual way of showing that things are happening in the soil, and it's a big improvement, and there's big changes between the two halves of the soil already. That just shows the relationship between soil carbon and the decomposition rates. And at the end of the day, a very good measure is often the number of earthworms. And again, the red integrated ones here, in general, are showing more, except, of course, when you do things like grow potatoes. More later on that. In terms of soil strength, this is water-stable aggregates at the top of the soil. It's less stable than lower down, and this is basically showing that the integrated system, which is this one over here, is doing better in water-stable aggregates than the conventional. So it's improving. And in terms of, also this is the effect of potato cultivation bulk density on diversity of pore sizes. And again, we've got no difference at the surface, but the integrated management does improve the pore sizes at depth. Again, those two lines you can see diverging in the right direction. This is looking at soil physical strength. And you'll see this here is at the potato year, and then these are the other crops as they follow on. And this is the, so I think this is shear vein, yeah, shear vein, so soil strength there, really quite low, but it rapidly returns to a decent level after at the other crops. And the difference between the integrated and conventional is these bars here. So that, by the time you get to the third, fourth, and fifth following crop, has increase much more in the sustainable or the integrated part than it has in the conventional part. So soil health is going in the right direction, even when you've got potatoes in the rotation, rather disrupting everything every 6 years. We have stones in our soil. We put through a stone separator. We really mash up the whole soil structure when we have to grow potatoes in our system. But people need to grow potatoes, so we need to find a system which actually improves things despite doing that. Many farmers take potatoes and vegetables out of their system to improve soil sustainability in some of the farms around us. That's another way of doing things, but how do you produce those crops then? In terms of the soil chemistry, this is really grouping a whole load of things together. Percent carbon, nitrogen, organic matter, pK, pH, and there's some closed circles and open, or closed and open symbols here, and they're the two different systems again. So we've changed it, and changed it for the better in the integrated part. And that's just combining a whole load of measures. It's going in the right direction. In terms of plant nutrients, we're trying to basically reduce the amount of mineral fertilizer going in by the soil management I've just been talking about, also integrating our legumes in particular. Our cover crops, obviously important, and varieties with better nutrient utilization. We haven't done much on there, but I think there's a great deal of potential. And in fact, I think, yes, one of these down here basically shows the year of introduction of various barley varieties and their nutrient or nitrogen use efficiency increasing. So it is, many of the varieties that we're now using are more efficient than the old ones used to be. And there I think we should target them, I'll come back to this later, to our growing system a bit better than maybe we do at the moment. This just basically shows a major component of the carbon footprint of our cropping is, certainly in normal Scottish agriculture, the amount of fertilizer that we put in. We also obviously try and reduce losses. So this again is about soil health. It's about reducing erosion and runoff, and also gaseous losses as well. So we've been looking here particularly at things like field margins, and that also has benefits in terms of biodiversity in the field margins. In terms of renewable inputs, legumes, particularly good. This is just showing some bean varieties, and we haven't got ones which are particularly suited to one or other of the systems here. They're just all good for putting nutrients back in the soil, and particularly nitrogen. This, again, it's probably not showing up very well, but this is a project, a European Union project that we got, plant teams or intercropping, and a lot of this work is trying to grow some of the main crops, but together with legumes in particular. And this is proving very successful for a number of combinations where we're getting quite a lot of over-yielding. This particular trial is spring wheat with beans. That's working quite well. But matching the varieties is a critical thing. So we're trying to get at the principles where you choose the right varieties which will grow well in an intercrop. That, again, probably hard to see, but these tall things are rye. In there, we've got winter peas, we've got oats, we've got ryegrass underneath, and I think there may be another component in there. This is some of the work I've been doing, separate from the other trials, on biomass cropping in winter. Colossal yields for very little inputs, very little, if any, fertilizer, very little need to use things like herbicides because you've got highly competitive crops and huge biomass. This is proving really quite a good way of not only producing a crop, but I'll come back to in a minute what happens afterwards with the next crop. But if you actually take some of these, in this case, winter crops of various pea varieties with various barley varieties, you might be able to see the green here, that's 20 to 30% over yielding. So it's producing 20 to 30% more than if you grew those crops separately, or a land equivalent ratio of 1.2, 1.3. So you're getting more, and actually you're reducing inputs at the same time. So if you can work out a system where intercropping works for you, then there's often a lot of benefits, not just to that crop and all the economics and agronomy of that crop, but also to the following crop. In the case of the biomass crop that I showed earlier, afterwards I drilled winter wheat, winter barley, and spring barley. So that's winter wheat, winter barley, spring barley. And these are the previous year's biomass crops. So I had beans, peas, oats, peas and oats, beans and oats, and then some other ones here, which some of them include some legumes, but they're barley there. And what we've got here is an average 30% increase in the yield of winter wheat after they followed this rather than these, or 20% in the case of winter barley, or spring barley it was about 10%. We direct drilled into them straight afterwards, or in the following year in the case of the spring barley. So he did actually manage to derive a lot of benefits from using this approach. I'm not surprised about the legume. I am surprised about the oats. So you probably got some allelopathic effects happening there and changing the soil microbiology. It worked for this soil in this circumstance, but I think we need to look into a lot of these things and these with respect to cover crops as well. So I think there's a lot of interesting things to follow up potentially on which components do we put together, not only in cover crops, but also in intercrops, which can have beneficial effects following on as well. Just by way of something interesting, if you, obviously we all know growing one crop continuously isn't a good idea, but I basically asked the question of what happens if you actually then restore the rotation. What is the effect on subsequent crops? And so I had an area that I grew continuous barley for about 15 years. And so I then restored the rotation with oilseed rape for a year, and then beans for the following year. Then I went back in with the cereals again. And this shows the winter barley, or I don't know, 20 or so % increase compared to the continuous barley still in the same year. Spring barley did something similar, but winter wheat didn't. So it's actually a quite crop-specific effect we came across there. which is quite interesting. But it's really reinforcing one of the things we all know, that if growing continuously the same crop isn't a good idea, but it just gives you an idea of where it has an effect and how much that effect is. Just want to talk a bit about cultivation. Most of in the Centre for Sustainable Cropping, one half is ploughed, so inversion tillage, and the other half is minimum tillage, or is now changed to direct drilling. This is some work from the south of England. It actually shows the benefit in terms of winter wheat of a cover crop, and you'll see that actually, to begin with, it's negative. This is in a ploughed system. It eventually maybe starts becoming positive. In a what's called shallow tillage or non-inversion tillage system here, it goes positive much more rapidly. So we've probably got an interaction with the whole way that we're dealing with the cover crops. And tillage is a crucial thing. And again, bring up tillage again in a few minutes. We decided to see whether this worked in Scotland for spring barley in a ploughed system, which is the common system in Scotland. And along the bottom here, we've got various different cover crops. They're ordered according to the amount of brassica in the cover crop. And this is the control here, and you'll see that here, actually it's 100% brassica cover crop, actually gave the most benefit in terms of response in the following year. That's almost counter to what we've sort of been thinking in terms of complexity of cover crops being beneficial. But I think we need to work out for what system, for what crop, for what soil, for what environment are the key things that we need in our cover crops to give a benefit. This is what happened in this circumstance. What was it actually doing, that cover crop, or not one of the middle ones actually? And this is just looking using a spectral method at what's actually happening. It's basically showing that in this particular case, we're getting more organic matter, or protein in particular, into the system. So that's probably one of the components that's happening through that cover crop. Finally, on the things on the CSC, they look at biodiversity, and again here particularly look at weeds and look at IPM options and things like that. This again, it's probably hard for you to see what on earth is going on in these graphs over here, but basically, first of all, looking at the weed seed bank, what's the effect of the two different cropping systems? There was really very little effect overall on the weed bank. You did get a bit of difference in more beneficial dicot weeds in the integrated system, but in general, what this is showing here, this sort of principal components analysis here, is a dominant effect is the field. You can't shift it much with your cropping pattern. The weeds you've got in your seed bank in the field dominate. You won't shift it very much in our case, anyway. In terms of the emerge weeds, there was more of an effect, but it was not a big effect. We got more dicot weeds, particularly in the spring barley and beans. And that's really shown in this graph here, I think, yeah. There was no competition of these increased weed cover with the crop, but you obviously get the biodiversity benefits out of this system. In terms of what happened to the actual biodiversity, we've got lots of study, lots of data. I'm only going to show you one bit of this, which is just looking at bees. And again, these taller bars here are the integrated system. And in fact, even in the potatoes, we're getting more bees in the integrated system. So it's an indicator of some good ecosystem services, beneficial effects of biodiversity. Again, this form of management system seems to be having positive effects. IPM, could go into lots of things on IPM. I'm just going to illustrate it with one thing, which is for blight, major problem to us. Smith periods with a normal forecasting, we've discovered they don't work very well any longer because the blight population has changed and the environment's changed. So we modified those criteria. And we came up with what's called Hutton Period. This is now all available on a service on the web. You can put in your postcode in the UK and get a forecast, or you can look at it on a map form like this. But we actually looked at when the Hutton periods would come up, and we looked at in theoretically when we would spray compared to conventional, and discovered we would reduce by 3 sprays, which potentially had across the whole of Scotland, whoops, how do I go back? Oh no, that's it. Seems to have disappeared, but it should say about 4.7 million benefit in terms of saved costs. In practice, 1 year, it was wet all year, we got blight all year anyway, so we just had to spray the same amount. Next year, it was dry all year, so we didn't spray at all. The following year, we saved 1 spray in practice. So theoretically, this could be a benefit in any 1 year. It varies how much benefit, likewise with all forecasting systems. So what was the effect on the whole system in terms of yield? And I put here up graphs for 4 of the crops in the rotation. And you may not be able to see which line is which very easily because they're very close together. And in terms of yield, they yielded the same for all those 4, despite all the benefits you got in the integrated system and sometimes reduced inputs. So it was still doing okay, yield-wise, for those 4 crops. 5th crop, winter barley, you'll see they diverge a bit, where the integrated in the 2 years didn't do quite as well, but did okay in the rest. Winter wheat is where we've got our problems. It's not performing as well. Why is it not performing as well? I mean, this is a very nitrogen-hungry crop. Maybe that's part of it, but there's a lot of things we've got to improve there. But how do we actually assess in this complex system where we're varying a whole load of things at any one time, what's responsible for which effect? And basically, you've got to use different tools to do it. And we do use what we call multi-attribute modeling, which there's packages to look at this sort of things, but you modify it and put in all the things you can measure and see which you think, it'll tell you which are responsible for the behaviors. And I mean, here is something which I find quite hard to interpret, which should guide some people if they like that sort of thing, but it's the integration of loads of factors. This is, again, you probably can't see it very well, but this is comparing 2 systems. That's a conventional, that's an advanced system. And this blue thing here is looking at the economic versus environmental and social sustainability amalgamated measures. And you'll see they're all in the center there. They're much wider, they're looking better. And you can drill down that one's energy use. But it's the amalgamation of lots of different components, and you look at the relationship between them. So, I mean, there's things like, there's tillage, for example, going in there, and lots of things feed together. But those are really quite hard to interpret. So what we tend to look at is this sort of heat map or color map, where basically red here, and you can probably see potato, there's an awful lot of red, and the conventional, it's not doing very well. Whereas in integrated, it's improved in a lot of these things. Some of these others are green. And if you look down the very right-hand column, or maybe another column which we haven't printed out, they're all the individual things which we measure. And if you find that some area is particularly red and you want to find out why, you say, right, that's the sort of factor you've got to improve. But can you improve it without compromising something else? And this is the sort of tool for looking at complex systems that we're trying to develop to say which way do we push the system, where overall, with all these multiple factors changing, which ones should we change more or less or change in a different way to produce a more sustainable system for different outcomes. And it may be we want to have better environmental outcomes at the cost of economic, if we maybe enable that by some subsidy payment incentive system, if that's what we want to do. So this is a sort of information which will feed into that type of analysis when we look at whole systems and the value of looking at whole systems. I want to just say a little bit more now about soil disturbance. Again, you won't be able to see this, unfortunately, will you? This is an aerial view of an old trial where we were basically looking at 0 minimum tillage, conventional compaction, and deep plough. And originally, we were looking at this for one of my interests, which was variety mixtures. And basically, we showed that the variety mixtures were great for reducing disease by about 3/4 in that case. And, oh, I've gone and done it. Press the wrong button. There we are. And also increasing yield by about 3% overall in that trial. but there was no interaction with the soil cultivation conditions. But the following year, I decided to look at a whole load of varieties and see if that's true. Do all varieties actually interact with soil cultivation systems in the same way? So I trialed out basically a whole load of varieties in this system, and you tended to get this sort of effect, which was some of them all behave the same under high soil disturbance or low soil disturbance, i.e. inversion tillage or non-inversion tillage. Some of them behave the same, some of them don't. Unfortunately, the ones I'd used in the previous work were all down this end here. But here, things like, say, Phyta, it likes high soil disturbance. It doesn't seem to like low soil disturbance. So we've got a new tillage platform. Again, you can't really see these, unfortunately. But we also, as well as a new tillage platform, we did some work on the farm where they'd had conservation tillage for about 20 years. And they allowed me to plough some up. This is from the old platform. And what we find is that if we plot the non-inversion tillage, so the direct drill compared to the inversion tillage, we get varieties like Sassy, which really like non-inversion tillage. And we get varieties like, say, Scholar, which really likes ploughed conditions. Why is Sassy liking those conditions? In the Centre for Sustainable Cropping, we happen to use Sassy and another high-yielding variety. And what happened there was that on the minimum tillage, again, Sassy came out really high compared to under ploughed conditions. Laureate did exactly the opposite. So that's just 2 trials. This is 2 more trials. This is our new tillage platform, and that's the farm. And on the top, I've got a whole load of varieties here, which are ordered according to, this is direct drill, so non-inversion tillage conditions. And these are ordered according to the ploughed conditions here. And again, Sassy comes out top, but it drops down under ploughed conditions. Sassy comes out top, but it drops down under ploughed conditions. Laureate is low down under direct drill, but it likes ploughed conditions. In that case, Scholar does the same. So we have got differential adaptation even amongst the barley varieties which are bred all under ploughed conditions in terms of the way they respond to the conditions you're using in the actual field. So have we even got the knowledge as to what varieties are good for the sorts of agriculture that we're doing in the field, as opposed to the agriculture that the breeders are using or the testers are doing? And this was just another experiment where for 10 years we'd done minimum tillage and used compost amendments and slurry amendments. And again, Sassy was coming out top. Laureate was coming out further down. So consistently, we've got differential variety responses to even tillage conditions. How many other things have we got not the right variety for our particular farming system because they're not being bred and assessed under those conditions? But the other thing that came out of this work was a disease effect, which as a pathologist, last I get on to talking something else about disease here. And again, you probably can't see this, but you've got some smaller bars here which are blue, and they are direct drilled yellow rust scores. The red are the ploughed yellow rust scores on wheat varieties here. Here is the same. The red is the ploughed powdery mildew scores of lots of varieties compared to the blue bars down here, which are the direct drill. You're getting about 1/5 of the level of infection on the direct drill compared to the ploughed conditions. Why is that happening? This incidentally happened for some other diseases as well, but all the mildews and rust. It's also happened at both sites, and it's repeated to a lesser extent the following year. Explanation? I think probably mycorrhizal associations, because in ploughing you break up all the mycorrhizae, so it's going to take longer to establish. Mycorrhizae classically prime resistance responses, so particularly things like rust and mildews. When they land, they need to be recognized fast in order for the resistance to be effective. So I think that's what's happening. They are more primed in the direct drilled, ready to respond. We did test that out in a pot experiment, and the red ones are the non-disturbed or equivalent to direct drill, and you get more hyphae, more arbuscules, and more spores, and fewer of the fungi. So it works in a pot experiment. We're now trying to demonstrate this in practice in the field. It might not be just mycorrhizae, it may be many other components of the microbial soil composition. So really I would now just want to, I whizzed through quite a number of things there. It's really probably impossible to summarize them, and I hope you picked up one or two things of interest there. I hope I've demonstrated that systems, there's just so many interacting things, somehow you've got to work out what the sum total of that interaction is in terms of how did the system perform overall for what you're trying to get out of it, which may be yield, it may be profitability, it may be more biodiversity, it may be a number of things, and more likely it's a combination of those things. And there are tools that we can use to try and work out which direction it's going and steer the change in our systems. Soil cultivation, I regard as quite a dominant factor in the soil health area. Rotation, let's think about everything that's happening in the rotation in terms of that crop, the following crop, and the whole of what's going on. Suitable varieties, I don't think we're even probably breeding with that objective of the varieties suitable for our systems always. So we need to look at that certainly in some cases. I really don't know what the situation is with vegetables in this, but that probably needs looking at in the same way. And really, a lot of this is about exploiting diversity in the system, number of components in the system, how different the components in the system are, how you actually deploy that difference in terms of space and time. So in other words, there's lots of different components of diversity that we need to deploy, and there will be lots of effects of that diversity on our system. And it's trying to understand the principles driving that and how we improve what we call sustainability or resilience of the system overall. And soil health, which is really contained in some of those things, is absolutely key to so many of these things. I'm not a soil scientist, but I've very much learned that for almost everything else, it has a big impact. And I think with that, I just want to acknowledge, well, a whole load of people involved in this, apart from ones I started at the beginning with, and there's a whole load of logos of people involved in that. And so finally, I think I finished. You probably can't see this, but this is some old painting with a whole load of people having drinks and things like that. I usually say that's our trials team after they've done one of my trials, trying to recover. But anyway, thank you.
Don't run away. We probably have time for one or two questions if there's someone with a burning question. Yes, up the back there.
I agree with there's many tangible and intangible benefits with direct drilling in all sorts of situations. In the Scottish experience, one of the limiting factors we have in Tassie commercially is control of slates and that minimal tillage thing. Do you have that sort of issue in your trials?
Control of slugs, did you say? Yep. Whoops, sorry, I've just destroyed your script. We actually did measure slugs in the work that we did on the spring barley. There was a significant increase, but they were very low anyway. So they didn't actually have any consequence in this particular case. But certainly, I know that talking to direct drill farmers, this is a major issue. And the one where I have my trials on his site, he hates using slug pellets and he has to use them, he says. So, yeah, it can be an issue. I think it's not as big an issue as people often say, actually talking to the people who have a mature direct drill system, probably because they've learnt to manage the whole system of cover crops and the crop sequence to minimize that. But yes, it is a potential problem. And with direct drilling, I mean, yeah, you don't just solve a load of problems, you actually potentially introduce several problems. And again, you've got to look at the whole system and point in the right direction, yeah. I think somebody put their hand up over there earlier on during my talk, and I carried on ignoring you with apologies because I thought I'd go way over time. I started answering questions in the middle.
Yeah, so your intercropping that you were doing, were you cutting those crops dry or just cutting the silage?
The ones where I showed that complex mixture of things, winter crops, that was taken for silage, could be used for animal feed, which it was, or anaerobic digestion. But the ones where I showed the 20-30% over yielding, which was a winter pea, winter barley combination, those were combined when ripe. And so I don't know actually what we did, that was just experimental work, but potentially that could be used for feed. So yes, both are possible. The issues with if you're taking them to combine is obviously getting everything to ripen at the same time. And in the previous experiment, for example, I had 3 different pea varieties. 2 of them ripened at the same time of, I think, mid-late August for us. It's about when they should have done. The 3rd one, I think, would have still been green at Christmas. So we had to put a desiccant on. So sometimes you have to do that. And the other thing is, year to year, predicting with even a pea barley, spring pea, spring barley combination. In one year, the barley was ahead of the peas, and the next year, which were really contrasting years, it was the opposite way round. So it can be an issue, but choosing varieties we discovered is pretty crucial, and we're trying to get at, let's say with beans and wheat, do we need taller varieties or something like this? How do we match things? So we're trying to get at the principles and actually put together an online sort of help with design tool for actually putting together intercrops, and that's part of our EU project Diversify. Yeah. They were drilled together. Basically, this is usually in plot drill. And we've done it both direct drill and ploughed. We just mix them together, which is fairly easy in small packets to do that. We've also done it with a 3-metre farm drill as well, and it's proved okay. Depths, yeah, there's going to be some compromises. It seems to have been okay in our soils for our conditions. But potentially you could separate them in different coulters on the drill, various things like that to get to different depths. This year I was actually challenging the farm to go in a second occasion and actually drill between the previous drills, which they're not sure about the accuracy of the GPS on that, but we're maybe going to try a few things like that. So there's potential machinery modifications and things which could help if intercropping justifies it. So, and that's one of the things, again, we're looking at in that project. Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
I think if there's other questions, you might catch up with Professor Hutton over lunch. We might move on. Before you go, say thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.